Well, welcome back. Today we're going to dive into the world of identity and access management, or IAM. Now, you might be asking yourself, why should I care about IAM? Well, let me put it this way. Imagine your company has data that's like a treasure chest, and IAM is the key that decides who gets to open that. Now, without the right key, anyone could just walk in with your jewels. So in this video, we're not just going to talk about IAM, but we'll also show you how to implement it effectively and why it is crucial to protecting your organization's digital assets. We're breaking down the steps, share practical examples, and give you a few inside tips to make sure that your IAM strategy is rock solid. Now, whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting in the cloud world, stick around because we got a lot to cover. So let's get started.
Is going to be identity management and process. The idea here is how individuals gain access to a system and resources in any organization. Now, when we're talking about a cloud environment, it's more critical to have a robust identity management system because we will have multiple users, and don't forget these users could be anywhere. If you imagine a corporate environment where employees are needing to access various applications, now without proper identification, obviously unauthorized people would get in and potentially put any sort of sensitive data or information at risk. The most common way to create users is the Active Directory that we all have known. That Active Directory also lives in these cloud solutions. We can efficiently manage these identities by limiting access based on user roles. If you look at IAM itself, right, which is really identity and access management. Identity management is to keep a management of identity of all these people who they are. Now, when we talk about authentication and its methods, the authentication is a process of verifying the identity of a person or a system from a definition perspective. What that really means is, what are ways of finding out that who is this person? Something you know, something you have, something you are, and there are a couple more that has been added. If you think about these methods, these can be combined as well. When you combine these methods, that's how we start to get multi-factor authentication. This is a factor. Something you know is a factor. I have a PIN or I have a password, that's a factor. Something you have, like a security token or a smart card. Something you are, which means fingerprint, facial recognition. Another very common one is somewhere you are. Now, somewhere you are means the location now. For example, if I have a company that is completely in Canada and I don't allow people to work from home, for example, it makes a lot of sense for me to make sure that I lock access based on location. So I can put location to be Canada, which means is everybody or anybody who's trying to go out of Canada and trying to get access will not be able to get access. That's the best way of saving that extra headache of people coming from outside who are not authorized to come in. When you look about something like a single sign-on, this basically just allows authentication to be a little more easier. Obviously, we're trying to give them access to multiple systems. You have federated identity systems. If you understand this concept, which means is I could go beyond one organization, enabling seamless authentication across multiple identities. We are using our Google account to log into a lot of services like YouTube, Google Drive, or even third party. For example, if I'm trying to log into a Cisco packet tracer, it does give you option, use your Google account to do it. So that basically means is I'm using the same credential and there are some open protocols that are used. The ones that I have listed there, SAML, OAuth, OpenID. We don't have to go into details, but just understand that there are some protocols that are being used. So if somebody says, what's SAML or what's OAuth or what's OpenID, these are basically protocols that are used under single sign-on, and they basically simplify identity management again by allowing one set of credentials for multiple applications. And if I'm extending my single sign-on capabilities across different organizations, I'm creating a network of trust. That trust is called the federation that has been extended. When you use, again, Facebook, Google to sign into any new app, you will definitely be using one of these protocols that are mentioned. Now, there are going to be ways that they will be making sure that it's you. If you use your Google item or your Gmail to log into something, you usually get an email saying somebody logged in as you into the system, just to make you aware that there was a login based on that. If I go and look at one of them, SAML, if I talk about, it's an open standard for exchanging authentication and authorization information between ID providers and service providers, mainly for web-based applications. Used for a range of ID providers. Commonly, as I said, they are the federation services where I'm trying to able to have multiple organizations share that with me. If I look at OAuth, this is used by many websites. It is used to determine which information is provided to the third party and the site. And the idea is to allow for permissions to be granted within that application. OpenID, last but not the least, and it's an open standard which uses decentralized authentication used by an IT provider, which would be Google, AWS services, or even Microsoft. Now, the next thing is access control models. What are these? See, there are different models that are available. Some of them are old, some of them are new. The first one we want to talk about is the discretionary access control. This is, it says the owner controls it. What does it mean? The access control in definition, which means is what authenticated users are allowed to do once they're in a system. But when somebody says DAC, that really means is think of this as a file system. If anybody is done a little bit of Linux, when you create a folder, you can create what kind of access are you going to give, or who are you going to give that access to. This kind of falls under DAC, which means the owner controls the access. Or even let's say if you create a file on your Google Drive, you can say that who am I going to give access to? You can put some email addresses, say that only people with this email will be able to access that file. Or you can create a public link, which means anybody and everybody can access that, right? The second one on the list, which is the MAC, this is based on regulated basis. Now, what do I mean by that? This is mainly used in very crucial environments like military or health, governments. It's basically, think of this as anything that is secret, top secret kind of stuff. So we won't see it very often, which means is they are going to regulate who has access based on the security levels. So which means is you will have to go through certain clearance. I'll give you an example. I had a couple of projects that I was working with for government. They had asked that who will be the engineers who will be working on this project. Once the names were given, I had to sign up a form that they will be doing a background check and everything, just to make sure that I don't have a history that put their data at some sort of risk. Only a person with appropriate clearance level can access that classified data. What we're trying to do is ensuring sensitive information is protected there. The other two, I would say, are pretty straightforward. Role-based access control, these are more common ones that we see today, which means based on my role, I will assign a certain access. If I'm an auditor, then I will be given access to maybe finance, maybe a couple of other things. But if I'm a marketing person, then I will not be given access to finance. I will be given access to something else. These two terms sometimes can be interchangeable. Attribute-based access, which means is department or location will figure out that what kind of access do you have. This is called as attribute-based access control. The most common ones are the bottom two. The above two, the DAC and the MAC, are old school. They don't get used very often. And the reason behind that is because it's a management headache. Think about this. If I have to create a file and every time to figure out that who should I give access to, that can be a pretty hard thing to manage. Next thing we talk about is object authorization. First of all, what's an object? Object is an element that exists within the cloud that can be controlled or configured. Now, what do I mean by that? It means is there are users, there are groups, or some sort of services, or even parameters that's called an object that exists in that cloud that I'm trying to protect. This object authorization is simply will figure out that what action a user can perform on a specific resource. It is kind of going beyond identifying the users. It is saying, okay, yes, I know who you are now, but I will also define that what kind of access do you have on the system. Example, in this case, if you have a file sharing platform, different users will have various levels of access. Some can just view the file, others have permission to edit or delete it. And this is what basically access rights are defined through object authorization rules. If you have an on-prem solution, it's done through Active Directory. Within Active Directory here is your users, right? Users here are individual accounts for people within that same organization. Every employee will have a unique username and password that allows them to access company resources. That falls under user. Then you have computer accounts. That's the second on the list. The computer accounts are created for computers that are part of that network within that company. It helps you manage and control the devices that are connected to the company's domain. Now, for instance, each computer in an office might have its own account in Active Directory. Now, based on what that account is, your access might be restricted. And then there are administrators. Now, these are the people who have special accounts. You can think of that as elevated permissions that will allow them to manage and configure Active Directory environments. The most common people in this case would be what? The IT staff. Why are they administrators? Because they are the people who are going to be installing software and will be managing user permissions that are given. I'll give you another example. When you're in the class, you have computers in front of you, you log in with your username and password. Are you able to install anything on those computers? You're not, because you have not been given access, but the administrator can. So it's pretty much like I'm giving you a computer with some pre build software. Now, the advantage there is because nobody has access to install anything, the chances of getting viruses and unauthorized access into the computer is much simpler. Next thing is services. Now, what are services? See, service accounts are, again, they're used for running certain applications or services on the network. For example, if I'm running a database server that might be used a service account, this is basically handling operations without a need of a human to user with a username and password to log in and make that changes. So basically this means is I have a services account that when a computer needs to go and do certain things, use a certain service, that it has access to go to that particular service on its own without a user putting something in. And the next one on this list is obviously groups. Now groups is pretty self-explanatory, I would say, but basically that means is groups are collection of user accounts. They can be managed together. Students, instructors, office people, or staff, whatever we want to call it. If you have different departments in an organization, again, like marketing, sales, HR, finance, they might have different group, and then based on that, they will be given something. What is domain? What does domain really mean here? See, if you think of a domain, domain is a boundary within that Active Directory that controls and manages all the accounts and permissions. Now think of this like as a little boundary around your house, and then each room has somebody with different access, like a security bubble that keeps all the accounts, computers, resources secure. So if you have a company, let's call that company TechCorp. They might have a domain called techcorp.local that all the resources are part of that domain. Now, sometimes there are two domains and there could be a trust relationship built between these domains. Now, I would say in older times, the most common scenario here was, let's say the TechCorp bought another company called BizPartner or something like that. Access is controlled based on that trust relationship between these two domains. Now, trust simply means that one domain recognizes the permissions and the accounts of another domain. So which means if I have an email address or a computer which is in TechCorp now, will be able to get resources in the BizPartner account as well, allowing all the users to access resources in both the domains without needing separate credentials. So I don't need to create another set of credentials for the TechCorp guys to access stuff in BizPartner. They can use their existing accounts and get access to those resources. So access is granted based on establishment of trust. Obviously, the trust has to be there. I need to make sure that I trust that domain. Now, these concepts that we're talking about, they're key to network security and management in general, ensuring that only the authorized users and systems have the right access to the organization resources. Obviously, we're talking cloud here. So why are we talking this? Let's move to cloud. Sure. In that case, if you look at a solution, for example, an infrastructure as a service, IaaS, what kind of access I'm talking here? So if I've created a virtual machine on the cloud somewhere, who has the access to start that machine or reboot that machine? That's an access thing. Who has access to the network of that? Who has access to the storage of that? Who is able to take snapshots? Not everybody. Obviously, we're talking cloud here. So why are we talking this? Let's move to cloud. In that case, if you look at a solution, for example, an infrastructure as a service, IaaS, what kind of access I'm talking here? So if I've created a virtual machine on the cloud somewhere, who has the access to start that machine or reboot that machine? That's an access thing. Who has access to the network? Who has access to the storage? Who is able to take snapshots? Not everybody. Not the user who's using it, maybe the person who's managing it, right? So now you understand what those objects are. What are the people who have access on what happens when you have a new person coming in? Let's say if you are the IT person of this particular company. And account provisioning involves creation, maybe modification, maybe removal of the user accounts. Automating all this process will definitely improve the efficiency and minimize the risk of human error. And I'll give you an example. Actually, many years back, when I was working for the radio station as an IT coordinator, 40% of my time was spent in creating new accounts and deleting, because we had a lot of turnover in that office. We had a lot of people who would temporarily come in, do a certain job, go. So create their accounts, give them access based on what their roles are, let them go once they're done. There were a lot of summer students there too. That was another reason. If I can automate all that, obviously it will be much easier, right? So when a new employee joins a company, there is an automated workflow instead of setting their accounts up or assigning roles or providing access to necessary tools such as, okay, you want um, obviously an email address and certain, because you have a certain role, I have to give you access to certain cloud applications. I wish I could automate all that at that time. That would have been much easier, saved me a lot of time. And there is a risk of me, instead of giving that person access to marketing, I maybe make a mistake and I give him access to finance, which is not the right thing to do. So the human error is always going to be there. But if I'm automating the process, that is gone away. So when I'm talking about account provisioning overview, it's simply a process of creating, modifying, disabling, removing any user accounts. When we talk about provisioning management, obviously you understand that initial creation task that would include, let's create biometric recording for this person, or give them a physical credential like a username, password, and based on that, setting certain permissions. Now, when a new employee joins the company, they will receive a username, password, and access rights to the relevant systems they're going to be working on. And then you have the onboarding task, the process of integrating a user into organization systems, ensuring that they have all the necessary credentials and permissions, making sure that they have all the tools that they need. What about modification step? This involves, okay, you have a new role, or you might have to fill in for this person, and this person also had access to one more system. That involves changing permissions, updating system access, or let's say if two departments have been merged, or most common would be if an employee gets promoted, their system access has to be updated to the new resources. Now, password resets and account disabling. Obviously, if you forget a password, now most systems are smart enough where you will be like, okay, send me a forgot email, I'll get a link, I click on that, I'll be able to recreate a password that I can use now. Most systems will say if you put the password locked 5 times, it will be locked, and then you'll have to go to your admin to unlock you and then send you a link that you can actually go ahead and reset a new password. If you had automated tools that can be helping them reset it, secure voting, as you would understand, it simply means person has left the company. You have to make sure that the access has been removed so they don't have access to any company resources once they're gone. Now, let's talk about automation. So, automate provisioning means automatically creating these things, which is streamlining the process, reducing the manual effort that we're trying to do. So as soon as somebody joins, it will trigger a task like an email setup and granting access to required permission. It's automated. You don't have to do anything. You just have to add that person's name into a certain group, and that's it. Everything else gets done by itself. The second point that I'm showing you here is orchestrating provisioning. See, which means I'm using automated workflows for account modification to speed up the process, making sure every time I do certain things, it is consistent without any user errors. And then you can have user portals. This can be, you can go to this portal, all the employees, and you can go and do your stuff over there, like a self-serve portal. So you don't need IT support for everything. You have a portal that you can go and do it. Now, for example, if my colleague needs to reset one of their accounts, obviously they have locked themselves out, so they can't go in, but they can ask me, who's who's a colleague, can go in and do a request a reset for them, and then it will be a link sent to them, and they will be able to click the link and they will be able to go in. Now this whole process is based on trust. That person, if he forgets or gets locked out, can only ask a colleague, and only the colleague with the right credentials can go in and do that reset for them. The idea here is this all can be done without the need of IT support. And then obviously automate a task. It's like account disabling can be obviously automated. For example, as soon as a person leaves the company, there could be something like delete the user account on an Active Directory or something, or disable it temporary. As soon as that gets disabled there, that should kind of trickle down other processes, which means that this user had access to whatever, everything should get disabled automatically. It doesn't mean that, okay, you have to go and check now, oh, this person is going, he or she had access to 10 systems. Now I need to go to each and every 10 systems and disable that. Now, since we're talking security, I will not dive deep into this. I will give you a very high level. So first of all, when we talk about a public key infrastructure, see, key really means here is these are not physical keys. These are just like certificates which are digital. You have symmetric keys and then you have asymmetric keys. Symmetric keys or symmetric encryption, it means that you have to use the same key to encrypt something and you decrypt something. It's much more faster, but it poses a challenge. If you and me have to talk to each other, how should I send that key to you? When I try to send that key to you, if somebody grabs that key, guess what? They are able to grab all the information that we are exchanging. Example here would be imagining of encrypting a file with a password and sending that password over the email. Now, I'm also making that process a little risk from a security standpoint, because I've sent you an email, I've said, here's the attached file and here is the password. If somebody really gets hold of that email, they have access to the password, obviously, and they also have access to the file. So there is a potential risk. When you talk about asymmetric, this is what it uses a pair of keys, something called as public key for encryption and a private key for decryption. This method is very secure because the private key never gets shared. This is not the right platform to discuss how those things work, but I'll give you a high idea. This is more like think of this as a mathematical formula, which really means is if you take a stream of data, ones and zeros, and you put an operation across it, you will be able to get a certain result. Another key which is there, that key can reverse that process and give you what the stream was. Initially, if I use my public key to encrypt something, if you want to send me something, my public key is out in the open. Everybody knows about it. There's no secret in that. You use that public key, you encrypt that. Now, if anybody wants to reverse that, will need a private key that only I have. The challenge there is that it is very intense on the system to do this encryption, decryption every time. It is much more intense because the mathematical formula is much more complex in case of asymmetric as compared to symmetric. In order to not put a lot of stress on the systems, the best way is to combine both methods. What do I mean by that? See, initial key can be used, so you can use an asymmetric key cryptography to exchange the keys that will be used for symmetric cryptography. Once the keys have been safely or securely grabbed by both the parties, then they can use the same key to start going on. So this is the idea of symmetric and asymmetric. If we start talking about digital certificates, see, digital certificates are issued by certified authorities or CAs. They validate the identity of that particular certificate. So it's based on trust. It's almost like if college trusts me and I trust you, then you have the trust of chain all the way up. Now, these certificates that we're saying, these are the ones that actually have public keys there, which are validated by the CAs. And by the way, if you look at any browser today, they have public keys. Public keys get updated on them a lot on common basis. That's how you have public key of everybody. Basically, when you're trying to go to a certain bank, for example, let's say you're banking with RBC. So that public key for RBC is already in your browser. When you send stuff to them, your username and password, they are able to kind of go ahead and look at it and say, yes, this is the right person who's trying to come in. So that's when you see your lock symbol on your browser, which means that yes, it has the valid SSL or TLS certificates issued by a trusted authority, CA. Example would be a VeriSign, which is a company that is basically responsible for issuing all these certificates, right? So they let you encrypt and ensure that your communication is secure at all the time. If there is something happens, there is a issue with that, you can revoke that. Revoke means, okay, now it's no more valid. And this is also true for, I can also have my users. Why am I talking about this? Is because even a user can have a certificate. So when you go into your machine and you're trying to get access to different systems, the systems are getting access not based on your username and password, but the certificate that was installed on your laptop. That certificate is saying that, okay, this is the laptop of this person. That's why this person has this access. You can use to secure an email. You can use VPN authentication. You can use it to sign a document digitally. Obviously, website encryption. It is basically, the idea is to provide secure foundation for all these activities by combining the symmetric and asymmetric encryption techniques. So VPN will use a PKI to authenticate a user and encrypt data. That will ensure that the sensitive information that has been transmitted over that network, which is a private network, remains secure. Now, the whole idea of this was talking about IAM, Identity Access Management. If you look at IAM in Azure, they have couple these services are free to you. So for example, if you're using AWS, AWS gives the IAM service as free because they know, obviously, if I'm going to access something, I need to give my customers a way to secure that different services that I'm providing. That's why that service is free. In Azure, you will basically have something called like a Microsoft 365 Admin Center or even a Entra admins. Now, these are two different portals, you can think of that as, that will help you create users. I don't know how many of you have heard the term Entra. It's a new term. It was, you can say, a rebrand of Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is now called Entra basically. So if you hear that term Entra, ENTRA, which really means is Active Directory. If you go to Google, they have their admin portal where they have a tab called as directory that will show you all the users, and that is where you create all the users, you create all the permissions, you create all the policies. That's the whole idea. Now, at this point, I understand what IAM is. I understand why IAM is used. But then the next point becomes is, so how do you roll out IAM? Doesn't matter if you're using a cloud or which version of cloud. How am I going to do this? So there are certain steps, right? So when I'm trying to roll out the IAM, you have to understand the fundamentals here. What kind of fundamentals I'm talking about here? IAM obviously involves managing users, identities, and their access to system within an organization. For example, in a cloud environment, IAM allows administrators to create roles for specific job functions and grant certain permissions. Correct? That is kind of understanding of what these fundamentals are. And then steps to implement IAM. What kind of steps do I need? Reviewing existing controls. So I am moving from on-prem to cloud. I need to understand what my on-prem policies are, existing control policies, and then identifying the areas that needs maybe enhancement, because now I'm moving to cloud doesn't mean I just take it and put it to cloud such the way it is. Can I enhance it? Identify which user currently has admin level access and if they really need it, or let's say if there was a person who has more access than you think they need for their particular role, maybe I should rectify it right now. Next one is you define your IAM policies and roles. This is where I'm obviously establishing clear roles and permissions that align with your organization's security requirements, whatever those are. For example, you can say, okay, my company's policy is always create read-only roles for employees who need to view information but not edit it. So why do I give access completely? I will only give them read access. They only need to read documents. They don't need to change them because they are not the creators of those documents. Selecting the right tools. What is fitting with my organization infrastructure? Like, should I use AWS IAM, Azure AD, or Google Cloud IAM? That obviously depends on which cloud are you going to adopt. That goes back to the question that we were trying to answer before when we were saying journey to cloud. Next one is your threat mitigation techniques that you can use, because there are still going to be threats. So how do I make sure that I don't get stuck somewhere. What are the common threats? Phishing, where people get emails, somebody's credentials got stolen because they put their username and password on a sticky note and put it on their laptop. There was some unauthorized access. By mistake, extra privilege was given, which is another term called as privilege escalation. MFA, we spoke about MFA, which means let's not have one way of authenticating. I will also use a username and password, but I will also use something else like an RSA token or some sort of authorization that every time I log in, I get a text. Follow the principle of least privilege principle. What does that mean? Ensure that users have minimum level of access necessary to perform their task. Limiting access. This is a principle that always give the least possible access that they need. Just because it is convenient that this person might need access later, let me give him now. I know he doesn't need it or she doesn't need it now, but maybe later they might need it. Then obviously role-based access, we've spoken about that. Based on the roles, we give them permission rather than individual users to simplify access management. All right, so few other things to consider. Scalability. Ensure that whatever system you adopt, you're able to grow with your organization, because maybe today you have some sort of a system that says, okay, I will give you access to 20 users, but you know for a fact that tomorrow your company is going to be 30 users or 30 people, then you will not be able to scale well. That is what really scaling means. You should be able to integrate with multi-cloud environments, which means is if I have a username like a directory within one environment, I should be able to share that with others. Now, let's say if I've created a username and I've created all the policies, I've done all the hard work in AWS system, I have created another app in Azure now. Does that mean that I have to recreate all that IAM stuff I did in AWS again in Azure? And there is a chance that I missed something. Can't I just use the same thing? That is basically the purpose of integration of multi-cloud environment. Last but not the least, compliance. Am I making sure that I am in compliance with industry standards, regulations like GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, or there is ISO 27001, all those. So what should I take as next steps to get there? There has to be a roadmap. You create a strategic plan that what kind of initiatives I will be taking within my organization to get to an end result. Start with a pilot, small team before you scale everybody. Again, same idea that we're trying to say before. You always do a POC, you do a pilot, and then you finally roll out in production. And you still need to make sure that you're continuously improving. How can I continuously improve? By making sure there is some sort of system that gives me reporting. When I have that report and I can see what is happening, then I can regularly, I can update my IAM policies to adapt to better emerging threats. That because see, threats are changing. When you talk about hackers and you talk about people who are trying to secure all that, it's a cat and mouse race where they're going to try and come with a new vulnerability. You're going to try and say, okay, let me stop that. But how would you know what kind of attacks are being made on your systems? By having some sort of monitoring in place. Now, just to kind of put everything in perspective, this is the last slide. When we talk about I and then triple A of security, what I'm trying to say is identity. Who are you? What are your attributes? Also factors. Something you know, something you have, something you are, something you do. This is little advanced, something you do, which means these days there are certain systems that can, based on the way you walk, maybe they're able to identify who you are. We already spoke about somewhere you are, location. I can use one or more, obviously more than one would create a multi-factor authentication. This is with identity. Authentication means prove your identity, and then based on who you are, I will say, yes, you are the right person who you are saying to be. And then the next step becomes authorization, verifies which objects, services, resources that you can access. This we spoke about. We have access control systems. The most common one today is the role-based access. DAC and MAC are old. This was where a user was creating a file and giving out access. This is the top government agencies where they're saying, okay, you need to have top security clearance in order to get that. So you won't see that of RBAC and ABAC, which is role-based access or attribute-based access. Based on who you are, they will give you access. And accounting is the last piece in the 3 A's. This basically, first of all, will check for, okay, is the system available? The whole system of logging in, is this even working? Yes, it is working. Okay, is it compliant? Is it following a certain rules that have been laid down by a certain body or a system that we follow? Are there any security violations? Did I see a lot of password attacks or wrong password attempts? And then is there any way to go ahead and do investigation that was it the right person or was it somebody trying to attack me? And the last thing to remember always is when we talk security, policy of least privileges, which really mean is I will give you the least possible privilege.
And there you have it. Everything you need to know, start implementing a secure and effective IAM solution in your organization. Remember, IAM isn't just about controlling your access, it's about empowering your team with the right level of access they need to get their job done while keeping your digital assets safe. Now, if you think about the golden circle, why is about safeguarding your data and reducing risk. The how involves strategic implementation of IAM tools and the best practices. And the what is a secure, compliant, and a scalable access management system for your cloud environment. Bye for now.